Hello, good afternoon, all. Folks are just filing in virtually. We're really glad to have you all here and to get started with our March Artivist Town Hall. Um, as always, just some ground rules for our conversation today. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from, how you identify or fit within the creative sector. If you have announcements or updates that you'd like to share with the group, the chat is a great place. If you wouldn't mind, just that everyone can hear each other, please stay muted unless you're asking a question. And then we're just gonna dive right in because we've got a packed agenda today. So I am really delighted that we have two folks presenting from the Mass Budget and Policy Center. Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center is one of the leading think tanks in Massachusetts. They are regularly called upon by the legislature and the governor to provide insight into how the state budget and state investments impact the lives of the residents of the Commonwealth. So it is a delight to have Kendra Patterson, Director of Delivering on Equity, and Jessica Troe, a Senior Policy Analyst, join us today. And we're gonna dig in. We're gonna talk about it is budget season here in Massachusetts, and so they are going to give us an overview of what we can expect and what is happening. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides so that Jessica can share theirs.
Good, thank you. Great to be here, everybody. As Emily said, I'm Jessica Troe, a Senior Policy Analyst. I work on the state budget at Mass Budget, and I'll hand it over to Kendra. She can just introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Kendra Patterson, she, hers. I'm the director of the Delivering on Equity Collective, which is a collective of grassroots organizations who focus on budget advocacy for more resourced BIPOC and working class communities. So happy to be on. And this is actually my third presentation with MASSCreative, first in my new role. I'm so really excited to get into these details with you all.
So I usually like to start, if we can put in the chat, like if you had one word to kind of describe how you feel about the Mass budget, like the Massachusetts state budget, if you could share that, that would be great. I know that, before my time working at Mass Budget, I would have described like chaotic as my word for how I feel about the state budget. I came from federal budget work, which is chaotic in its own right, but definitely like just different forms of chaos. So if you want to just share in the chat or like come off mute and shout it out just to give a sense of how people are feeling. Anything? Concern is a good one. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Not easy to access, non-transparent. I like curious. That's exciting. Definitely overwhelmed. Yeah. I always like to say like it is like this huge document. It is not transparent and very intentionally not transparent. I think it's kind of easy to do things a little under the cover of darkness for budgeting. It's great if people don't actually know where things are going. And so hopefully we want you to walk away from this like with a better sense of how the budget process works and where to look and who your resources are, so you can be an advocate in this space. Great. I think I will hand it over to Kendra.
Yeah, so what is the state budget? You can think of the state budget as inputs, outputs, what's coming in, right? And what's going out, and what do you see in your communities, with our shared public resources. Another thing to note, and you can go to the next slide, it is actually the largest bill that passes every year, right? It goes through every year, and we'll talk about the process. And so you might remember, use the bill, the bill. You like the bill process. This is something that's plugged right in. So it is actually, it goes through the legislative process. It's not in a standalone process. It goes through all the, ways and means committees. It touches the hands of everybody in the legislative body. And that is something important to think about as we're in the legislative process. Now, so is the bill for the largest bill, which is the state budget. As I mentioned earlier, there's a set of inputs and outputs, and I always love this image because it just shows you the flow, right? Largest part of the bill is our state taxes, our income taxes, what comes from our personal finances, largely contribute to the state budget. That big pile in that on the middle, ka-ching. Also, there's fines and fees. There are some more targeted. That's deeper conversation, in BIPOC and low income communities, facing more of those fines and fees, right? I'm keeping that in mind. There's also this gambling revenue that's risen here in Massachusetts in the Commonwealth. That is a part of the state budget. And something that is a huge conversation now, right, is these federal funds. How are we going to see this come into the state? How is that going to affect our overall state budget? And then once that pile, of all these different sources are compiled, they become actualized into what we see in the community, right? Our schools, our housing, public and open spaces, also police, prisons, courts. They're all funded by the state budget. And the MBTA, the roads, those are all products of the state budget and decisions that our legislators made to have funded.
This is just like a very specific example of what we were just talking about, the inputs and outputs. This was from the governor's most recent budget recommendation that came out in January. So I just thought an interesting kind of look into what this actually looks like, the numbers that everything is going to. One thing I want to highlight on this graph, you'll see kind of this below the zero, these like we call them off-budget transfers. And I actually just want to quickly, let's see if I can exit out of this and go to, this is the MassBudget budget browser, which is a great tool resource to see what's happened with funding. And just in terms of pre-budget transfers, I just want to know, so this is the Mass Cultural Council and related programs line item that we have in our browser, a great resource to see how much funding is going there. I know that's one of the priority line items for you all. And so this Massachusetts Cultural Arts and Performing Arts Mitigation Trust Fund, this green here, this is a pre-budget transfer. So it actually is from gaming revenue that has been designated to go to the Mass Cultural Council. And so that's, I think, just for you all specifically, a great example of what these pre-budget transfers are. And that just means they never go to the books because all this money has to automatically go from gaming revenue to the Mass Cultural Council. Let me just go back to the presentation quickly. Oops, sorry, too many. Yeah, so this is just kind of, I like to see where like the variety of different funds that we were talking, or the revenue sources, and where those go.
And just as that showed, what Jessica broke down, it's how our community comes together and, really decides what matters to us. It's really important for us to think about this budget being of benefit to our lives, right? This is how we get to work. These are the schools our children are going to. These are the parks and open spaces that we are enjoying at our leisure, right? And ultimately, those are all decisions. And for that reason, budget is a statement of our values. You can think about it in your personal life, right? When you go to the mall, when you go to the grocery store and you're picking up the things that, you really like, and you go to check out and you get a long receipt, right? It shows all of the items that you're invested in. It shows what you care about. When you look at your budget at the end of the month, you might be like, but you see all of the purchases and transactions that you've made. And ultimately, that shows what you value and what you care about. And in the same way, the state budget, all those outputs, where the money goes, it shows what our state legislators care about, what they prioritize. And so at a baseline, it's a set of choices that we make, right? And that's why we're here as advocates and having these conversations, because it's important for us to voice what we need and what we care about, for us to see our needs reflected in these budgets. So it is also shows over time, which communities and services deserve funding, who's deserving of what. And, this is where my work comes in at delivering on equity, for folks to have a baseline understanding of these systems to then be better advocates. And it's really important for us to be able to show our voice and have the statement of our values, what we're contributing to our society, also reflect our direct needs. And so it is a state budget is a moral document, as Dr. Martin Luther King said. Now, there are two kinds of budgets. There is the operating budget, which you'll see like teacher salaries, government services, day-to-day operations, what's paid for each year. And that's what we're mostly focusing on having our conversation about today, is the operating budget. There's also a capital budget. These are for buildings, things that are long-term projects, durable investments, maybe an MBTA car, crashed or was on a bridge and they needed a new one. That will come from the capital budget. These are all real examples. I wish that wasn't a real example. But just so you can understand the differences. One's more day-to-day operations, the other is more durable, long-term investments. Now we're going to go a little bit through the process about how the state budget is created. These are all the major players of the state budget, just so you know, like the governor is over the state agencies. And then what we also pay attention to, which we're going to see in the cycle, is the House Speaker, and then the budget goes through the House and the Senate and through their Ways and Means committees. And just important to know folks' names, are they your representative? Who are the major players in getting through this process? And how is it going to be approved by the greater body, whether that's in the House or in the Senate?
You want me to go? You want me to go? Yeah. All right. So how is the state budget created? So the Massachusetts fiscal year is from July 1 to June 30th. So we are currently in fiscal year 2025 and we'll transition to fiscal year 2026 on July 1. So the budget really starts back in December when we have to agree on a revenue estimate. And so we'll talk about this later on, but the state budget has to be balanced. And so our revenues have to match our spending. And so in December, the governor and legislators agree on how much revenue we think we're going to be collecting for the upcoming fiscal year. They use that. They do some forecasting and economic modeling to see what taxes will be coming in, what other types of revenue will be coming in, to get kind of like what our baseline budget number will be that year. And then after that, the governor works with her staff and state agencies to come up with their budget recommendations. So that happens in January. It came out this year, January 21st. And that really starts the budget season. Then we move on to House Ways and Means is where it starts. So right now, I would say after governor's budget comes out and when House Ways and Means comes out is a great time to talk to your representatives in the House, and really advocate for the things that you care about, the line items that you care about, so that your representatives can start talking to House Ways and Means about it and they can release the budget. So House Ways and Means has a lot of power in developing the budget. They kind of like that's their starting point, and then their proposal will move to the full House. And so then the full House will, your representative, like any representative can add amendments to it. They vote, figure out like if that's passed or not. So it's House Ways and Means plus amendments creates the full House budget. And then we move over to the Senate, same process in the Senate as the House, starts with Senate Ways and Means, and then moves to full Senate, again, amendments onto the Senate Ways and Means budget. And so once we have a full Senate and full House budget, it moves to something called a conference committee, which includes representatives and senators, and where they just resolve all the differences between the House and the Senate. I recently got a question in one of these, what if they can't agree on something? And I was like, they have to. But conference committee has taken a long time in recent history. We're supposed to have a budget done by July 1st, but historically we have not been able to get a budget out by then. And a lot of it is due to delays in resolving the differences between House and Senate. Then it moves to the governor, where the governor can veto any line items, any language that they see fit. And then it goes back to the legislature, where they can override the governor's vetoes. It's really interesting in Massachusetts because Massachusetts has such a large kind of supermajority. So you need 2/3 of the legislature to override governor vetoes, which is very doable in Massachusetts because of the supermajority. And so then that's just a discussion about what they do and don't want to override. And then we come with a final budget. So I kind of chatted about this a little bit, but what are moments to really step in and advocate? And so I think you can start all the way, back in the fall to ask the governor, to talk to your state agency, to like really advocate for increases in funding or adding line items or any of those items. And then I think a huge portion happens after governor releases the budget and between House Ways and Means. So kind of like the space we're in right now, it's like high budget season. This is a great opportunity to really talk to your representatives and senators, make sure that they know that this is a really important topic for you and you want to see an increases in your line item or an addition of a line item. There's a lot of public budget hearings that you can attend and express advocacy in. There's like lobbying days, legislative action, or like events in the state house. So any of those are great to be a part of. And then I think once the House Ways and Means budget comes out and it moves to a full budget, if your line item has not made it in or is not the funding you want, a great time to still talk to your state rep to add amendments to the issue. Sorry. And then the same goes in the Senate, between House budget coming out and the Senate Ways and Means budget coming out, a great opportunity to connect with your state senators and make sure you're advocating for things. And then the same thing when it goes to the Senate budget, you can ask your senator to file an amendment. I would say conference committee is a very black box situation. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of great advocacy moments in that time. It's very closed door, hard to really break into that, unfortunately. So your kind of next advocacy opportunity will be when the governor is vetoing and the legislature is overriding. If you want the governor to support the issue and not veto it or veto the issue, can connect with like her office on that. And then if there's something that she vetoes something that you didn't like, ask your legislator to override it. Or if it's good, ask them not to override it. So that's kind of a big picture of this budget cycle, ways to tap into it. I want to take a moment if there's any questions, points of clarification, or anything that folks have on this process. I know it's a lot of information at once.
While folks are thinking if they have questions, one thing that I do want to uplift, you'll notice that this process is very similar to a regular legislative process for a bill. The only difference is instead of the House budget committees, it will go to the specific committees assigned. Why I lift that up is because we're seeing in recent years a lot of policy being passed through the budget. So it's not just important to look at the budget for your specific line items, but also for your awareness of policy that's being passed through the budget and not in a standalone bill, which is usually the process for it being passed. So it's more important now than ever for folks to be aware of the budget process because regular legislation is being passed through the budget process as well.
Not seeing any questions in the chat. If anybody has anything, so we can move forward. This is just an example of the budget browser, which I kind of already had you look at, but I know that this is it, this is the Mass Cultural Council line item program that you guys are advocating for this year. Really interesting to look at these funding levels, very kind of a roller coaster situation. One thing I will note for using the budget browser, we do recommend that you use an inflation adjustment. I like to use the CPI consumer goods inflation adjustment just because I think that gives you much more better an example of like what actually this funding can accomplish. If you don't inflation adjust it, it can sometimes look like, oh, there's been all these large increases, but it's not really telling the full story. This is a great example of what it looks like when you don't inflation adjust. You kind of see that it looks like, oh, there was like this huge like growth, but it's actually not, it's a little more flat funded than that. All right. So we've kind of talked a little bit about this. How is the state budget paid for? Kendra went through that when she's talking about her inputs. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's really a really important thing is that our budget has to be balanced. And so, as I was saying, they come up with these revenue estimates. That's what we base it on. Unfortunately, sometimes revenue estimates are incorrect and that there actually is not that much revenue. And so there are potential cuts in the budget. Sometimes there's also, we actually are collecting more revenues. And so then the state passes supplementary budgets to budget those funds out. If there is a surplus in revenue and we have to do sub budgets, it is another opportunity to advocate for funding in your area. And again, as Kendra mentioned earlier, where does it come from? 57% from taxes, so a large chunk of it. I'll note importantly, this 25% piece of the pie is federal funding, which is there's a lot of unknowns and uncertainty in those areas right now, what that will look like. And I think the state people at Mass Budget are really thinking about what that will look like if that decreases and ways the state can step in to fill that space. I think that's it. Is that the end of this lecture? It is. There we go. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Jessica and Kendra, for that really, really robust and thorough experience or walkthrough of the budget. So Catherine asks, how do we know when supplemental budgets need to get passed?
Yeah, unfortunately, like I can't give her a super concrete answer to that because it's dependent on when the revenue, like when we know we have extra revenue. So right now we are dealing with a surplus in our fair share revenue stream. So fair share is the millionaire's tax. It's a 4% tax on all incomes above $1 million. We just kind of underestimated how much revenue that would bring in. So I think it's like $1.3 billion in additional revenues to budget. And so that it's for fiscal year 2025. So they're trying to move that through the legislature kind of as quickly as possible. But yeah, I think like you can reach out to Mass Budget to see what's happening with surplus, like the supplemental budgets, or ways to kind of tap into that.
Thanks, Jessica. Brett asks, what aspects of the budget is MASSCreative paying the most attention to, and what action specific to the budget process would be helpful? Brett, I'll give you your $5 after the call. So at MASSCreative, we sort of historically have really focused on that Mass Cultural Council budget line item. This year, we are also working with our partners in the regional tourism councils across Massachusetts to advocate for an increase in the Massachusetts Tourism Trust Fund. That trust fund funds all of our regional tourism councils and also funds the marketing to the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism, which are both major ways of marketing to attract local, regional, and international visitors to Massachusetts and to our, frankly, a lot of our cultural assets, who are main drivers of attracting tourists to Massachusetts. So Jessica and Kendra, I live in a state of trying not to catastrophize, but like, let's do it. So we've seen before, there's been many times before in the history of Massachusetts budget when things go awry. Revenues really fall short, or, like all of us who run a business or an organization, you create a budget, right? Where you say, this is how much we think we're going to raise, and this is what we'd spend it on. And then halfway through the year, you realize, oh my gosh, we are not raising the money we need to. We've got to figure out how to cut costs. So what does the state do when they need to cut costs?
Typically there's these, and this would happen last spring, things called 9C cuts. And so there's a group of programs that fall under section 9C of the general laws that they can cut. I am forgetting the list of programs. A lot of it falls in Health and Human Services departments. But so that's like what they typically can kind of go for the budget shortfalls.
And just so you all are aware, those tend to be programs and agencies that fall directly under the executive branch, which is the governor. Guess what is not underneath the executive branch in Massachusetts? The Mass Cultural Council budget. So that is an independent quasi-state agency. So that is not on the list of agencies that would immediately automatically be put under that 9C cut rule. I am also going to follow up to what Brett said, which is, what actions can you take? Well, we actually, so 2 days ago, the Mass Cultural Council, Michael Bobbitt, the executive director, testified in Rockport as part of the hearings process that Jessica mentioned earlier, and formally requested $28 million for the Mass Cultural Council budget this year. We stood up a sign-on letter that you as an individual citizen and your business or organization or coalition can sign on. You can do both. And we're trying to collect as many signatures as we can, and we will submit the letter to leadership on the House and leadership on the Senate. And this is the first sort of unified thing we can do in this year's budget process to engage the legislature on this action. So please take a moment, sign your name, sign your organization, and then I'd suggest you share it with 3 friends. Aaron asks, to what extent and how are resources flowing from the tourism fund to artists and art service organizations? Got it. Yeah. So just to be really clear, for the most part, except for 2 grant programs, that money is being used to market Massachusetts, right? So it's paying for Visit Massachusetts campaigns, which oftentimes this is the tricky part, right? Like I think I'm like, wow, they're spending a lot of money and I'm not seeing any ads. Well, I live in Massachusetts, so I'm not their intended audience, right? So these are campaigns that other people in other states or other countries are seeing. Oftentimes, a lot of the mass tourism and travel marketing that they're doing as a state agency or a state program, and then the individual regional tourism councils are showcasing arts events, cultural organizations, open studios in their promotion to tourism and visitors to Massachusetts. So it's not, I think where I would urge us to look is that there are many inputs that strengthen the creative sector and increase revenue and support artists and support cultural organizations. Some of those are direct funds, others are things like marketing that shift who's coming into our communities. And so that was the reason that MASSCreative decided that this would be another ask we could make to the legislature and unite the sector around to say, like, yeah, this does have this makes a difference in getting people to Massachusetts. Hey, Erin, you raised your hand.
Hey, thank you for those insights, Emily. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask the 2 grant programs that you referenced that may have more relevance and direct benefit to artists and art service organizations. Do you know what those are? Or could someone drop a link to those in the chat? Just curious.
So they may not be direct to art service organizations and artists. I think there's one that's about signage, and there's another one that's about attracting visitors, like physical investments to make in spaces for visitors. And I think cultural nonprofits are qualified under that. But we will figure that out and we will include it in the link when we share out this recording. Thanks. It's a great question. Other questions for Jessica before we wish her well and thank her profusely? So I will just say, y'all, I regularly, and the MASSCreative team regularly visits the Mass Budget and Policy Center's website for incredibly useful, dynamic tools to understand budgeting policy in Massachusetts. If you're like me and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to learn more, please check them out. They also have an email list. You could sign up for that. Again, they are looking at a number of priority issues, including housing, transportation, education, all things that intersect with our sector, right? So similarly, when we're standing up to say arts need public investment, we also know that artists need housing. And we know that that's part of the conversation, and we can stand up for more financially accessible housing policy. So check them out. Jessica, thank you so much. It is really wonderful to have you here. And please extend our thanks to Kendra as well, who had to leave a little early.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, so we have just a little bit more time, and I want to share some updates in terms of some other pieces of advocacy and organizing work, if that's okay with y'all. If it's not, please just drop off the call, I guess. But I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. So we had, okay. So as I mentioned, the priorities this year that we're really looking into is 28 million for the Mass Cultural Council and 17 million for the Mass Tourism Trust Fund. As we talked about, here's some actions to take. So you can add that sign-on letter. Also, this is a great time if you already are in dialogue with your state representative and state senator to just drop them a note. let them know about something that you're working on that's been really impactful in their district. And if it's been in any part funded by the Mass Cultural Council, let them know that too. This is a great moment to help them understand the impact that public dollars are having to arts and cultural activities in their districts. So let's talk about some federal funding some federal updates. So as Jessica and Kendra mentioned, right, one of the big issues when we're talking about funding in general in Massachusetts is there's a big question mark both to the state and to cities and towns around what the administration may try to do in terms of penalizing states that refuse to comply with executive orders, and by penalizing them by holding back federal funds. So that is something that is obviously very much top of mind. There are some other pieces that I want to just flag here. And this has a lot to do with what's happening with the implementation of the executive orders that the administration put into place starting in January 20th and continuing on. So actually the most recent one is that 2 days ago, the Department of Education terminated grant programs that were doing teacher prep and teacher training programs. This actually has an enormous effect because several communities in Massachusetts, including Springfield and Holyoke, actually were pulling from those funds in order to deal with the shortage of teachers in their communities. So this is having real direct effects to communities across Massachusetts. The really important thing to note right now is that in almost every case related to federal action, there is Congress is not the body that is going to be able to stop this immediately. It is the courts, which means we as advocates need to be updating our members of Congress and our senators about what all of this means for us as artists, for humans and residents living in the Commonwealth who are paying attention to the experiences of our neighbors as well as ourselves, but that we are really tracking and trying to pay attention to what's happening in the courts. We have an unbelievable attorney general in Massachusetts right now. Her office, Attorney General Andrea Campbell, her and her team are continuing to really press and file lawsuits to stop a lot of the things that are happening, including this. So a lawsuit was filed by State of California and et al. That included several attorneys general's offices and Massachusetts Attorney General to stop this. And a judge issued a temporary restraining order just yesterday. Sorry. Okay. Great. Sorry. I went with the last one first. So, the so another piece, right, which was the Office of Management and Budget put in a federal funding freeze in January. Those federal funding freezes have been contested in the courts. I've just named 2 of the lawsuits that were filed to stop those from happening. And in both cases, judges have granted injunctions to make sure those dollars continue to move out. So we are tracking those. Again, if you look at the New York et al., Massachusetts is one of the petitioners in that case. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. My lovely slides are having a problem. Looking specifically at arts and cultural policy on the federal level, so the National Endowment for the Arts announced some things earlier in February. They eliminated the Challenge America grant program. This was a grant program that specifically supported arts activities in historically marginalized communities and poor economically disadvantaged communities. That program has been eliminated, and they made an announcement that grant applications that center and promote the 25th anniversary of the United States, the sesquicentennial, will be prioritized in grant programs moving forward. The big thing that many of us have been tracking and paying attention to is that the NEA announced that anyone who was applying for grants had to as part of the application, sign an agreement to attest that they would comply with the executive orders related to removing any programs that were focused on belonging, inclusivity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then also comply to comply with an order to erase trans people from their work and from talking about trans people. So that was not great. And in fact, this is the first first of the lawsuits that we are seeing on the federal level where arts organizations are taking a stand. So a lawsuit was filed with the help of the ACLU. Rhode Island Latino Arts was a filer, as well as our very own theater, TTO, the Theater Offensive, is another co-filer, as is the Theater Communications Group, which is a national service organization for for theaters across the country. That was filed on March 9th. Immediately after that lawsuit was filed, the NEA voluntarily rescinded the requirement that applicants had to attest and agree to those things around promoting gender ideology. They did not remove the requirement that you had to pre-comply with the DEI executive order, nor did they remove from the actual saying if you got the award that you would have to do it. You just don't have to pre-sign and pre-agree to the erasure of trans people when you submit your application. We will see how this plays out. As many of you who pay attention to the history of the National Endowment for the Arts, this is not the first time that the National Endowment for the Arts has been sued in result from either executive or congressional action that is meant to stifle creativity and silence voices, and goes against the First Amendment. So we will continue to follow that. Federal worker layoffs. This is another area that will have real impact in terms of all of our lives. There have been many lawsuits that have been filed related to laying off federal workers. There's two. Again, the National Treasury Employees Union filed a lawsuit, as did Maryland et al. Included in the et al. Is Massachusetts. And we are following and tracking these lawsuits. Judges have not done anything yet in terms of ordering preliminary injunctions, but we are tracking this as well. And then we talked about education funding. So that's the federal update. I'm going to stop sharing and just see if there are questions in the chat. Yeah, so Britt, what does it mean to pre-comply? It basically means it's saying like, you agree that if you get this grant, you will do these things. So regardless of if they're basically making you comply ahead of time. It's not saying you have to immediately do those things, but it's saying if you get the grants, you would have to do that. Let's see. I'm just trying to check and see if there are other questions around the federal piece, because I'm going to go back and talk about state in a second. I'm sorry, my slides were out of order. Are there any other questions around the federal? Yep, Maureen.
Hi there. Sorry, it's Maureen Hennessy out in the Berkshires, she, her. I thought that the NEA had, after the federal district court in Maryland put a temporary injunction on all the DEIA executive orders, that they had at that point said you didn't have to do the assurance of compliance for the DEIA piece of it. But at that point, they were still saying, but you still have to do the gender ideology one. And then last week they dropped back. So we had decided not to apply back in November because we were like, we don't know what's going to happen with NEA. But I've been just trying to track it. So I thought they had put that on hold. So just
thank you for that update, Maureen. I missed that in my tracking, so I appreciate that. Thank you for making all of us on this call and MASSCreative smarter. I appreciate that. And better informed, I should say. Aaron asks, speaking of compliance for license to operate that impacts creative entrepreneurs, is the BOI form still required? And if so, by when? What is BOI? I apologize. I thought I knew all of the acronyms.
No problem. It has to do with ensuring that, I guess, none of the funds or resources you may generate as a creative who's not just independent or not affiliated with the nonprofit isn't somehow being directed elsewhere, perhaps in support of terrorism or other causes that are contradictory to U.S. interests. So it's a federal form that they said, yes, you better do it, or else we could pull all of your licenses. Or so.
Yes, I believe that is still in effect. But I will get, Aaron,
Okay.
I will get an answer.
Okay. I was just thinking as more and more creatives structure themselves, different legal identities, this is something that inevitably impacts the arts and culture sector too.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. We will flag that and we will start tracking that as well.
Thanks.
I am going to move us back for a second and talk about state policy. I'm sorry we're a little out of order, but if you'll bear with me. Okay, so we have some policy updates. So at MASSCreative, one of the things that we have worked on and worked with you all on since literally, I think the second day we were founded, was the state budget. But as we've continued to grow in terms of our collective political power and strength and our advocacy power that we all share together, we've been able to really work to advance other pieces of policy beyond just the state budget. And so many of you joined us in the fall to participate in our community conversation series, which was both an update to you all about the progress of bills we filed last session, as well as check-ins about what pieces of policy should we be really working on this legislative session, and what where you were interested in lending and moving more of advocacy support. So thanks to that feedback, we put together the creative sector legislative agenda. We call it that because it is of, by, and for the creative community, right? It's not MASSCreative's, we all share this thanks to the input and the partnership that we're going to share in advocating together. All three of these bills were bills that we worked on last session. They have a couple of tweaks and some new names. The first one was better known as last year was the Creative Space Preservation Act. It's got a new title, which is to grow and maintain space in cities and towns for creative economy. We're really delighted that Rep. Cahill and Senator Miranda have again agreed to file these bills and sponsor these bills. This would create a mechanism for an actual definition under preservation law in Massachusetts for creative workspace and performance and demonstration space for arts and culture. It would also give cities and towns the right to create stand-up trust funds to hold both physical assets like buildings and dollars in a trust to grow and preserve creative maker space. Literally, the trust model is based on how we look at affordable housing models in Massachusetts. So there's like precedent for how to think about this. The whole point of this is to deal with the fact that more and more artists are losing their workspace, and there are more and more organizations that are struggling to find performance and spaces to display their work. The next one is the improving accessibility in the creative economy. This would take a small percentage of the Health and Human Services budget and create a fund to support the implementation of physical adjustments and program adjustments in cultural nonprofits and creative businesses to make our spaces more accessible to the deaf and disability community. This bill was filed in response to a report that Open Door Arts and Mass Cultural Council put out 2 years ago that basically said arts and cultural organizations know what they need to do to make their spaces more accessible to the deaf and disability community. However, they lack the financial resources to do that implementation. That's not just about audiences, that's also about arts workers who have a disability, who identify as part of the deaf and disability community, and making sure that they are able to work in our spaces. Finally, an act establishing a program for local art and community engagement. This is a percent for public art with a significant emphasis on communities being involved in the commissioning process of public art. This is a bill that we've worked several sessions with Rep. Keefe on. And again, I should just mention that you see all these names, Rep. Donahue and Senator Mark on the ACE Act, and then Rep. Keefe, Rep. Ultrino, Senator Mark, and Senator Robin Kennedy. They are all sponsors of the bills last sessions, and it is really great that they've continued to sponsor these bills this session. So these bills, we held a briefing last week in partnership with Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the Mass Cultural Council to share with legislators and their staff around what the priorities are for the creative sector this legislative session, and to urge them to co-sponsor these bills. We have a form on our website where you can write directly to your state senator and your state rep and ask them to co-sponsor all three of these bills. This makes a difference. We're in co-sponsoring season. And one of the pieces here is that bills that have a lot of co-sponsors, it's a way to demonstrate that there's a lot of support for these bills and they get moved along a little faster. So it's really meaningful action when you reach out and ask your lawmakers, your state elected officials to co-sponsor these bills. We also know that none of this happens, none of our work happens alone. And so like last session, we are seeking folks who want to endorse these bills, both as individuals, as under your organization's auspice or through a coalition. You can sign on to endorse these bills. What that means is you are joining a coalition. Your name or your organization's name will be listed on our fact sheets and on our website saying you endorse this bill. And then we'll work with you in coalition to really push to make sure these bills get as far as they can, including, knock wood, get past this session, including more specific targeted advocacy strategy. So if any of these bills or all of these bills really feel right for you in terms of your advocacy priorities or for the coalition or the organization you're working with, we really encourage you to sign on to endorse. There you go. That's I'm reinforcing myself with my own slides. So so we talked about federal updates. We also, I want to just point out that we've just shared like a lot of like, here's what's happening. And now I want to talk a little bit more about what you can get involved with. So last week we held an info session around the Create the Vote work that we're going to be doing this year. We are specifically focused, because of the election calendar, on municipal election. These are local elections. These are folks who are running to be on the school committee, to be your mayor, to be your city councilor, to be on your select board, I'm even sure to be part of, if you have a town meeting representative. All of those folks will have a hand in making decisions about how your city or your town thinks about and prioritizes arts and culture. We need to make sure that they are hearing from us about the value and the contributions that artists and cultural organizations make in their communities, and also hear about what we need in order to really thrive and continue to deliver in this moment. And we know that when we talk about delivering in this moment, we're not just talking about the economic impact, we're also talking about the social cohesion, that we play a part in helping to support in every one of our communities. So we have already coalitions forming in Boston, Somerville, and Newton. And I want to shout out, I think Amy is on this call. Amy and Art Stays Here is working in both. Hey, Amy, is helping take a really leading role in both Boston and Somerville. We are looking for more folks who want to get involved. You can email Richleen Cadet if you are interested in joining one of these coalitions, or if you live in another community and you're interested in starting your own coalition. So that is the first way. This is many ways you can get involved, but here's one of them. And then even before November, I want to just flag here that the Creative Sector Advocacy Week is fast approaching. So this was something we started last year. In the past, MASSCreative has worked to coordinate a day at the State House. That was just one day in one location. Last year, we thought, why are we limiting ourselves? Why are we limiting the imagination and the advocacy energy of folks within our sector? We could have advocacy efforts, organizing events happening across Massachusetts. So we hope you will join us to think about ways that you can, through your organization or through your networks, hold an event during Advocacy Week. We have a sign-up form where you can register your event. We're also going to do some trainings leading up to Advocacy Week, including some Advocacy 101, 201, 301. 301 will be about navigating what you can and can't do as a 501c3 nonprofit in terms of advocacy and lobbying. We will also hold a day at the State House, April 30th, like we did last year, where we'll have a formal program in the Hall of Flags in the morning, and then we'll have performances, demonstrations, and displays of the work and the contributions of the arts community, both at the Grand Staircase and in the Hall of Flags for the rest of the day. Right now, we have a call out. So if your organization or you as an individual would like to propose a performance or a demonstration or display, we would love to consider it and hopefully have you join us. Thanks to the Mass Cultural Council, every artist who participates or arts organization who participates in performing or displaying their work will receive a stipend. So keep a lookout. We'll be sending a sort of like big announcement email about all the things that we are doing leading up to Advocacy Week, but already there are a couple of forms and ways you can get involved, and we have our website ready to go. The other thing I should just flag is that Advocacy Week this week also happens to fall on the week that the House will be debating their version of the budget. So as Jessica and Kendra talked about earlier, each chamber takes like a week to negotiate their budget. And so we will be advocating both in the building and in our communities that whole week about the importance of arts and culture and the importance of investing both dollars and common sense public policy in Massachusetts to hold our sector and to make it stronger. So good luck. The scheduling gods were looking in our favor when we put this together. Finally, I am seeing so many friendly faces on this call, but I am seeing some new faces, and I just want to remind you that MASSCreative holds programs like the monthly Artivist Town Hall absolutely for free, because that's the way we believe the best we can make change happen is by engaging and helping as many people as possible find their advocacy voice and use it. But we can't do that alone. And so if you are in the position, we wholeheartedly encourage you to consider chipping in to keep our work going. You can make a donation, a charitable donation through MASSCreative. Or you can also join the MASSCreative Action Network, which is the group that does the direct lobbying and fights for the policies that we are all behind, right? So we hope you'll consider either one or both. And we are so glad to have you all here. I'm going to stop sharing and use the last few minutes to track any questions or to open up for discussion.